Okay, our interrogatives are the what some people refer to as the WH words. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Be able to recollect them quickly, fast, right? They're at the back of your mind, ready to come forward. And remember to think of these first, before your senses. Okay? They're the foundation, right? We're going to build our answers on these interrogatives. You ask the question and answer them in your mind, and then answer them to the interviewer. Last time we talked about senses or sensory perceptions, and there's five, right? Sight, hearing, taste, smell, and tactile. And we use sight the most, right? About 80% of the time, what we get out of the world, what we're perceiving, we get through the use of our sight. Make sure you try to use the others when describing something because everyone uses sight, right? To show that you've got a good skill with English, it's good to tell people what something tasted like or what you heard or what something felt like when you tactily touched it, right? So, what are we going to talk about today? So today we're mostly going to talk about emotions, but we're also going to briefly talk about telling a short story. We'll get to that at the end. For the most part, we're talking about emotions today. What is an emotion? And what are the three primary emotions? Okay, won't quite get to that that last one yet. Emotions describe how we feel about things. It could show a really good command of the English language if you could explain how you feel about certain things, right? So you might ask yourself hometown interrogatives. Who? My mom, right? Then right says she's beautiful, or she had soft skin, or she had short black hair, or she had a high squeaky voice, right? Talk about describing her using different senses. And then also we could talk about how you feel about her, right? What do you think of her? Not logically, but emotionally. So once again, what are the three primary emotions? Okay, our three primary emotions would probably be anger, sadness, and happiness. Right? Whenever someone talks about how they feel, most of the time it's one of these things. It gets to the point where it's a little boring. Uh, we'll get to this in a minute, but if you have to use these, if you can't think of anything other than anger to describe a situation, let's try to think of different words instead of just saying it makes me angry, or it makes me sad, or it makes me happy. And a little side note on these, right? Some people believe that anger and sadness are very, very similar, very close. One goes inward, right? Sadness. The other goes outward, anger. And it's also difficult to describe which one is the opposite to happiness. It's almost to me like they're a triangle of emotions, right? Is sadness the opposite of happiness, or is anger the opposite of happiness? Most people might say sadness is, but there's still a lot of people out there who would say that anger is the opposite of happiness. Either way, they're three different emotions. Even though anger and sadness might be similar, they're still very, very different, right? As I just said, sadness goes inward, right? It's a bad emotion going inward, whereas anger is a bad emotion, but it's going outward towards the world, towards other people. So, what are some different ways to describe anger? So, some other things you could say are mad, right? That made me mad. But remember, mad can also mean crazy. Typically, in American English, when we say mad, we usually mean angry. But often, in British English, they might mean crazy. He's gone mad, right? He's crazy. But again, both Americans and British will recognize the other definition. I was furious when I found out. Furious is very angry. When she did that, I was outraged. Outraged is also very angry. If you are mildly angry, you could say annoyed or irritated, right? And if you are very angry, you could say enraged or inflamed. And these are just a few of them. It's a good idea if you want to look up some more words on your own. Always good to study on your own. Practice, practice, practice. All right. What are some other words for sad? Depressed is another one, or is one, excuse me, right? I was depressed when I heard the news. And depressed is actually kind of a common way to express sadness. It made me feel melancholy, right? When we broke up, I was brokenhearted. You could also say heartbroken. Those are both words, they're both fine. Uh, Either one are okay. Sorry and subdued can mean mildly sad. And blue is another common word for sad. I feel blue, which started as a slang, but now basically it's part of the language. Now I have a question for you. Do upset and unhappy, do they mean sad or angry? Unhappy and upset can mean both sad or angry, right? Most people will associate the words to be closer to sad, but they could still be angry, right? They both mean not happy, and they can both be in reference to either sadness or anger. Um, like literally, not happy, unhappy, right? So that doesn't always mean sad. It could mean angry, right? He's unhappy as he's throwing things around the room, right? That's probably more anger than sadness. Um, so look up some other words for sad too. Again, these are not all of them. Practice, practice, practice. Okay, what are some other words for happy? I feel cheerful today. The party was a joyful occasion. And something you might hear Westerners say around the Christmas holiday is Merry Christmas. Merry is another word for happy, right? He was a jolly old man. Content can sometimes mean mildly happy. I don't use it as that. When I say I'm content, it doesn't mean that I'm happy. It just means everything is going okay, right? And nothing wrong is happening. Nothing bad is happening. I'm content. And honestly, when people say I want to be happy, that's a little impossible unless you're crazy to always be happy. So often what they say when I want to be happy is they just mean I want to be content, right? I want to be maybe satisfied with how my life is going, as opposed to being unhappy, either sad or angry. Overjoyed means very happy. Again, and especially with happy, there are many, many words. Uh, this is just a small section of them. Look them up. Develop your vocabulary. Practice, practice, practice. Look up other ways to say that you're happy. Now let's look through love, like, hate, right, real quickly. Basically, I have them in order here. I love him. That means like very much, right? I like him. And then we could say I dislike him. A polite way to say that is I don't care for him, right? If your friend invites you over for dinner and you really don't like the food, it's a little polite to say, I hate this. This is horrible. This sucks, right? Or even I dislike this. It's nice to say, I don't care for this. It's a nice, polite way to say that you don't like something. And of course, you can say, I hate him. I can't stand him. Now, a little side note here is try not to be negative when doing an interview, whether it's a job interview, a school interview, or an IELTS interview. Um, a good thing is to stay positive. So if you start using too much negative, I hate him, I can't stand him, he's horrible, right? It sounds bad and it turns people off. People don't like to hear that. So they shouldn't judge you for that because you're expressing your emotions, you're using English, but just keep in mind, try to avoid things like that. Um, it makes people upset sometimes when someone else is too negative. They should not judge you for that, but they might. So try to keep things a little more positive. And I skipped one in the middle because it could have two meanings. You might not have an opinion, or you might think something's okay, or you don't care, right? If someone asks me if I like to watch other grown men play sports on television, I don't hate that. I might hate it if someone forced me to watch it. But in general, I don't like it. I don't dislike it. I really don't care about it. I don't have much of an opinion about it. It doesn't interest me. So I have those kind of things in the middle. You could also say it's okay. That means you don't really like it, but you don't really dislike it. So I kept those in the middle. I have no opinion about him. I don't care about him, or he's okay. He's all right. All right. What are some other emotions? Okay, I hope you thought of some other emotions. We'll get to those in a minute. Now remember, angry, happy, sad are so common and they're used so often. If you have to use them, I recommend using synonyms for those words, right? Delve into deeper emotions. Find some other things to talk about besides it made me angry or happy or sad, right? Um, it'll look much better if you could explain how you feel with different emotions besides those. We'll talk about a few of them. First, what is the difference between envy and jealousy? Okay, people commonly misuse these, right? If you are envious, you want what someone else has, right? You like their car, you might feel envious of them, they have a nice car. If you're jealous, you want a relationship with someone or you don't want to lose a relationship with someone. Jealousy is about kind of a fear of being isolated, not having this person in your life. So if you're envious of your neighbor's wife, then you dislike your neighbor and you want a wife, maybe any wife. But if you're jealous, then maybe you want his wife, right? You have feelings for his wife. So think of jealousy as more of a relationship, usually romantic, but not always, right? If someone new is hanging out with your best friend, you might get a little jealous. You might feel like you're losing your best friend to someone else. But usually when we think of jealousy, we think of romance. And it doesn't have to be your husband or your wife. It could maybe be someone you want to be your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? You want this person. Someone else starts talking to them. It might make you feel a little jealous, even though you're not really in a relationship with this person. But envy is more of coveting what other people have. You want something they have. You're upset that this person has a bigger house than you or a nicer job. It can make you envious. So often people will use that, right? If you've got a lot of money, your friend might say, I'm jealous. What she means really is she's envious, not really jealous. Let's look at some other emotions. How do you feel on a long trip? How do you feel before a big exam? How do you feel before a vacation that you are really looking forward to? How do you feel when someone asks you a question that you don't understand? And how do you feel when you are in danger or you think that you're about to be in danger? Or you might feel bored on a long trip, right? If you're on an airplane for 12 hours or you're in the back of a car for 10 hours, it might be boring. You might feel bored. And before a big exam, right, you're worried you want to do well on this exam, you might feel nervous. Before a vacation, let's say you've been planning this vacation for a year and it's finally getting very close, you might feel excited, right? If someone asks you something and you completely don't understand it, you might feel confused. And if you're in danger, you might feel scared, right, or fearful. You might fear something. So these are different emotions we could have. They're better, I think, than using sad angry, or or happy. And another one here. What's the difference between alone and lonely? Sometimes people might think they're the same, but they're definitely not. If you feel lonely, you feel isolated and by yourself. If you're alone, you can sometimes say, I feel alone, but often alone is just a state of being, existing, right? It just means you're not around other people. No one's around. It's highly possible to not feel lonely when you're alone, right? Some people like to be alone. They don't feel lonely when they are alone. Other people might, right, they might feel uncomfortable being alone and they might feel lonely. Sometimes being alone is positive. I consider being alone as positive. I like to be alone sometimes, and I don't feel lonely. Also, you could be around a large group of people, and if you don't know them that well, or you don't feel like you connect with them, you could still feel lonely even if you're not alone, if you're in a large group, right? So they're very different. Lonely is usually negative, and often alone, maybe not even a feeling, just a state of being. You're by yourself, you're alone, or you're with other people. I mean, it can be a feeling too to feel alone. But in general, lonely is more of an emotion, and alone is a state of being. All right, what are some other emotions? Okay, I recommend maybe I'll talk about a couple of these as I'm going through them, but I recommend you really look up a lot of these on your own. And there are many more. Remember, practice, practice, practice. Look at a lot of this stuff. I'll just read off a few other ways you could feel about people or things. Disgust, fear, contempt, annoyed, proud, relieved, enthusiastic, resentful, worried, eager, satisfied, infatuated. I was told some people might not know what infatuated means. It means if you have an extreme attraction to someone, like you have a crush on someone, that's infatuated. Guilty, remorseful, shameful, surprised, sympathetic, empathetic. Okay, let me get into those two real quick. If you feel sympathetic towards someone, it means you feel sorry for them. If you feel empathetic, it means you empathize, you understand what they are feeling or why they are feeling that way. Aroused, euphoric, alarmed, alienated, embarrassed, enthralled, thrilled, mortified, spiteful, hysterical, sentimental, longing for, hurt, anguished, attracted, exasperated, pleasurable, shocked, vengeful. Vengeful might be similar to angry, but if you feel vengeful, it means you think someone has done something wrong to you and you want to get them back somehow, get revenge, right? All right. And we didn't talk about, I wanted to save it for this time, right? You could mention some tactile sensations that we also call feelings. These are physical feelings, right? Instead of maybe more emotional feelings. So you could say, I feel angry. That's an emotional feeling. But I feel hungry. That's a physical feeling. If you're tired, that's a physical feeling. You could feel sore or hurt, right? If you feel hurt, it could be both emotional and physical. If right, someone stabs you with a knife, you could say that hurts, right? But also, if someone hurts your feelings, you could also say that hurts. And lustful, which maybe I think it's good to know what lustful means, but try to avoid. Look it up for yourself. Try to avoid lustful when when you're taking IELTS. And keep in mind, euphoric can also mean tactile. It could be a physical sensation that you're feeling, but also it can be an emotion. Typically, when we think of euphoria, it's a feeling that you get when you drink too much, right, or you do drugs, or it's some chemical imbalance. That's when it can be physical, right? If you're drunk, you could say you feel euphoric. But it could also be, I have it up in the list of emotions, it could also be an emotion. Maybe you meet this person, it makes you feel so good, right? You almost feel drunk, you almost feel euphoric. So normally that one's tactile, but it can also be an emotion. Okay, so there's a lot of emotions. Again, you can look up many on your own. Think about them for a few minutes, then we're going to try to answer some about your hometown. Okay, so we're going to build on our foundation. Our foundation is our interrogatives: who, what, where, why, when, how. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Have them memorized, ready to go in your mind. So who? Mother, let's say, right? We're talking about hometown, just as an example. I love my mother. I always miss her whenever I'm away. Who? Father. My father's very strict. When I was a child, I always feared him. He made me nervous. Who? My best friend. My best friend had very wealthy parents. I always envied her nice clothes and her big house. Now move on to what, right? What? My parents' house was far out in the countryside. When they left me alone, I was scared and lonely. Where? Near the beach. My hometown is near the beach. I'm always excited to go home because I love to go to the beach. It's so wonderful. Why? I love to go back home. There's always something happening in my hometown. It's very big and exciting, and I'm always thrilled to go back and visit. When? Let's say, I don't know, last time you went home was your grandmother's funeral, right? Last time I went home was for my grandmother's funeral. It was very depressing. I miss her, and I long for the days of my childhood when she would make a delicious dinner. How? Remember here, how is manner. How I get home. My hometown is very far away. It takes me 12 hours to get there by train. The trip is quite boring. So think of more emotions that you could use to describe your hometown. Look up more emotions to describe anything. All right, and we're going to get kind of into story now. What kind of story can you tell about your hometown? Okay, we've discussed interrogatives, senses, and emotions so far. The final thing I want to talk about for a good answer is a story, for part two. Now, sometimes you'll be asked to actually tell a story for part two. Sometimes it's actually part of the question. For example, they might say, describe the last vacation you went on. Well, that might be a story in itself. I mean, it might not. You could tell a story, or you could just describe. You think of your interrogatives, then think of your senses, then think of your emotions. But also, you could tell a story. A question might be, tell me about a time that this happened. Tell me about a time that you were with your father. Then you almost have to answer in a story, right? But even if the question doesn't ask you to tell a story, you can always tell a little story, right? Tell a little quick story. You don't have to fill up the whole answer with a story, but it takes up time. It shows fluency, and it's still related to the question, right? So right now, maybe pause this. Think of a brief story about your hometown, maybe 5 or 6 sentences, just something really brief, and well, then I'll give you a little one that you could do. But it's really good for you to be thinking about this by yourself. So you can slide a story into your answer. I believe the end is always a good place. But remember, this is speaking. You could put the story at the beginning, in the middle. It's okay. Uh, but I recommend going through answering this way, right? Interrogatives first, then think of senses to build on the interrogatives, think of emotions to build on the interrogatives, and then maybe at the end, tell a little tale, especially if you have time to fill, right? I remember once, blah, 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 or one of my favorite memories of my hometown is blah, blah, blah. Okay, so pretend you're asked about your hometown, right? You've gone through your interrogatives, you've gone through your senses, you've gone through your emotions, and you still have some time left, right? Tell a little story real quick. I made this kind of simple with small sentences because that's maybe how you're thinking and how the words are coming out, right? This is speaking, not writing. Even though you can use a lot of this for writing, this is speaking. So you're not going to come up with some elaborate, well established story when you've only had a minute to prepare. So I just made up a story for your hometown, right? I remember once when I was a small child, I got lost. My parents took me to the park and I wandered too far away from them. The park was very crowded with many people. I turned around to look for my parents, but I couldn't see them. I began crying and looking for them desperately. It seemed to last so long, but maybe I just remember it lasting a long time because I was, young. I was a child. Finally, a woman saw me crying and she helped me find my parents. That really scared me as I was young and had never been away from my parents for so long. I remember feeling confused and terrified. Right? That's a good, 20-second story you could tell, right? It takes up time. You're still on topic. And it's a nice way to end it if you can. Don't feel you have to. But if you can and you have time, go ahead and throw a little story in there. It doesn't even have to be this long. It could just be 3 or 4 sentences. Your story can be about anything so long as it's related to the topic of the question. Okay, so what did we talk about today? Go over the main things, right? Include emotions in your answer. How you felt about certain things, or maybe even present tense, how you feel about certain things, right? If you use the primary emotions, try to use their synonyms, right? Say I was depressed instead of sad, or I was overjoyed instead of happy, right? So it's okay to use the words, but if you got to repeat it, come up with a different word. It shows a larger vocabulary, and it's more interesting instead of saying sad, angry, happy all the time. And of course, try to use different emotions. Don't just talk about being sad, angry, and happy. Tell us a time when you were very bored, or a time when you were jealous, right? So use different emotions. Try to not just talk about the three primary emotions. And of course, build on your foundations. It's important. That way you could give an emotion about who, you give an emotion about where, you give an emotion about when, right? How, what, why, all of them, right? So build on your foundation. Have your foundation first, your interrogatives, and then build on them. Not just with emotions, but with senses, maybe even your little story. All right, your homework. Make sure your interrogatives and your senses are memorized. Now, there's a lot of emotions. There's no categories to put them in, except, of course, for the primary three. And some others are related to those. But just look up more emotions. Have them in your vocabulary, right? And practice describing how things make you feel. Okay, next time we're still going to be on part two. I know this says we're going to practice part two, but I think we'll do that not next class, but the class after, because there's other strategies we've got for part two that will really help you out some more. So I think we'll do that next time, and then the following time we'll go through a solid practice with part two, break it down, decide how we're going to answer it, and everything like that. So next time will be strategies more so than the time after that. We're going to do a thorough practice. We'll also do another practice near the end after we've covered part 1 and 3. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. That was great. Have a good one. Do your homework, and I'll see you in the next lesson. All right. Bye-bye.